Welcome and Chag Sameach, a happy Pesach to all of you watching, wherever you may be. I'm Rabbi Rick Brody. I'm the Baskin Jewish Community Chaplain with Jewish Family Service of Colorado. We at Jewish Family Service make an effort to reach out to Jewish residents of retirement communities, adult care communities, places where you might be during this holiday season. We wish we could be with you in person. We've struggled through over a year of this COVID-19 pandemic that has made it difficult for us to gather in person. We do see a light at the end of the tunnel. We hope it's an end of the tunnel as more and more people get vaccinated and cases are dropping. And we sincerely hope that before too long, I and volunteers from Jewish Family Service and your own family members and others who love you will have the opportunity to interact with you in person, where you are, in larger numbers, you and others who live with you. These are the hopes that we have as we continue to make our way through this very difficult time. And we're at the holiday of Pesach, of Passover. We're in the middle of the holiday. The official Seder nights were Saturday night and Sunday night of this past week. The staff of your facilities are making this video available to you in the final days of the holiday so that you can still have a taste and a sense of connection to our tradition, to our rituals, and to the very beautiful and inspiring themes of this holiday, the festival of freedom, Chag HaMatzot, the holiday of matzah, the food that defines this celebration when we recall, reenact, and reconnect with the story of our people's liberation from bondage, the exodus of Israelite slaves from Egypt over 3,000 years ago. Freedom's been hard this past year for many of us. My hope and my prayer, as I said, is that we can taste more of it going forward and use a little bit of time for celebration and reflection, gratitude for being together in whatever way we can, even if it's virtual. Hopefully some changes are starting to happen where you live, where you're having more interaction with other residents. We can be grateful for all of those blessings. And we can be grateful for being part of this beautiful heritage, this wonderful Jewish tradition that was founded on the idea of our becoming a nation, the people Israel, coming out of slavery and coming to know freedom, celebrating the dignity of humanity and the opportunity to worship and connect with God, whom we praise as the source of our freedom, a power that uplifts us, that gives us greater sense of purpose and meaning and blessing in our lives. Let's move into our Seder, this celebration of freedom. Before we begin with text, I'd like to sing a song that celebrates being able to be together. Some of you might be watching this as a group in a common space. Some of you might be physically alone. But one of the most powerful messages of our tradition is that we're never alone. You're never alone. We, the Jewish community, are thinking about you and caring about you. And this Passover Seder video is a way to break through that sense of separation. We're not alone. We are together, and we're grateful for that. And so I want to sing a song that comes from the Psalms that says how good and pleasant it is. Hine matov u'manaim, how good and pleasant. Shevet achim gam yachad, when brothers and sisters sit together. הנה מה טוב ומנעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומנעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב, שבת אחים גם יחד. I hope that you have the Haggadah, the text of this service, this order. Seder means order. This is the order of how we remember the Exodus. Feel free at any point that I read to read along, if that gives you an increased sense of participation. Certainly when we get to prayers and songs, I invite you to join in. You're also welcome to listen and say Amen at the end of certain prayers, or just enjoy this experience however you wish. Please open up to page 1, middle of page 1. How sweet it is to spend Passover with dear friends. On this holiday, let us celebrate the liberation of our ancestors from Egypt, thank God, and pray for all people who are not yet free. Perhaps you have some of these in front of you, some of the materials for celebration, such as grape juice and maybe matzah. We're not there yet, but I'll just give you a little sneak preview. Here's the plate of matzah. Here's the Seder plate with all of the other very special symbolic foods that make this holiday celebration unique. Whenever I do something with any of these items, if you have it in front of you, I invite you to do it as well. We're going to turn now to page 2. So the first thing that we do is Kadesh. We sanctify the holiness, we recognize the holiness of this holy day of Pesach. That's how we begin the Seder. And we do that with wine or grape juice. I've got good old Kedem grape juice, and we have 4 cups of grape juice throughout the Seder. Each time we drink and eat, except for the bitter herbs, throughout this Seder, there is a tradition, and there'll be a question about this coming up as one of the 4 questions, having to do with leaning or reclining. We do what folks did in days of old to celebrate their wealth and their freedom, which is to recline when we eat or drink. So we do that in the direction opposite the hand that we're using. So this is my right hand. I lean to the left, and I will drink in that fashion. I invite you to do so as well. The blessing ends with the words Borei Peri Hagafen, as we praise God for being the creator of the fruit of the vine. After the blessing for the grape juice, Borei Peri Hagafen, we go immediately into the blessing right below it, Shehechianu. This is the blessing that we say whenever we come to a first in a year, a new holiday celebration coming upon something special. We thank God for giving us life, for keeping us alive, and enabling us to reach this time, this moment, this special occasion. The Seder is one of those occasions for us to say Shehechianu, and that helps to usher in, with a sense of sanctity and gratitude, the holiday. So we go from Borei Peri Hagafen to the Shehechianu blessing, and then we lean and drink. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Borei Peri Hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Shehechianu v'kiyamanu v'higianu lazman hazeh. You can say amen to my blessing if you didn't join in. And now we lean and drink. L'chaim, to life. Moving along in the Seder, at the bottom of page 2, we come to karpas. Karpas refers to a green leafy vegetable. This is a symbol of springtime. This is a symbol of hope, of rebirth, of growth and possibility. That's the promise of the green leaves of parsley, and we dip them into salt water. We're going to have a question about this as well coming up. The salt water is reminiscent of our tears, the tears that our slave ancestors cried during their suffering. There are many moments throughout the Seder that emphasize empathy, feeling what others have felt, whether it be suffering or hope or jubilation or gratitude of those who came before us. We put ourselves in their situation. We experience what they experienced. And the truth is, we do experience all of these things, not in exactly the same way as ancient Israelites experienced slavery in Egypt. But we encounter hardship. We know what it means to cry, to have tears. We connect with the ancient Israelite experience of tears. But there's something about tears. There's a catharsis, a letting out of the tension that comes with sadness, a release that comes when we cry, when we express those emotions. And I want to suggest that tears are a part of the pathway to redemption. When we cry, when we let those tears flow, we open ourselves up. We get out of the stuck place of suppressing emotion and of feeling locked in. The Hebrew word for Egypt is Mitzrayim, which literally means the narrow place. And our sages emphasize the idea that slavery and oppression are about feeling restricted and narrow. And that can be an emotional experience as well, a state of mind. We want to come into the open spaces. Tears enable us to do that. They help us feel a little bit better, give us a little bit of hope, and it feels not as hard and awful as it did before we let it out through our tears. So, springtime and the possibility of hope and release from narrow places that comes with the taste of tears. We dip the parsley in the salt water, and we say the blessing that ends with the words, the bottom of page 2, Borei Peri Ha'adama, praising God as the creator of the fruit of the earth. After the blessing, we will lean and eat. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Borei Peri Ha'adama. We come now to Yachatz. We are on page 3. This is the next step in the Seder. Yachatz refers to breaking, the breaking of the matzah. You'll see here, I have 3 pieces of matzah on this plate. I'm going to take the middle piece of matzah and I'm going to break it. The smaller half I will put back into this pile of 3. The larger portion, after I break, I'm going to wrap up in a napkin and set aside as the afikomen, as the final taste of this celebration of freedom and redemption that will be at the end of the meal. That's called safun. The Seder doesn't end until the afikomen has been eaten. The breaking, some say, is a reminder of the splitting of the Sea of Reeds that the Israelites went through as the final step in their freedom from Egyptian oppression. Here we go. Smaller part back into the pile. The larger piece I will wrap up as the Afikomen. And I will set this aside. It is now out of sight, hidden in the middle of the page. This matzah is a symbol of affliction and poverty. The story of Passover tells about the hardships and suffering that our ancestors endured. It reminds us of those who are in need today. So we say, whoever is hungry, come and share our food and celebrate Passover. To those who are poor or oppressed, we pray for them and hope that the coming year will bring a better life for all. At the bottom of page 3, it says, pour the second cup of wine, or grape juice. That's because we are now ready for what we call magid, which is the telling, the central part of the Seder, the whole point of the gathering, the story of slavery and the move towards liberation. We begin the telling with questions. So much of the Seder is about learning. We can always be learning something new and expanding our sense of knowledge and wisdom and connection to this sacred story. And such a critical part of learning is through asking questions. So the 4 questions on page 4. Ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol halelot mikol halelot shebechol halelot anu ochlin chametz umatzah chametz umatzah halayla hazeh kulo matzah halayla hazeh kulo matzah shebechol halelot anu ochlin she'ar yirakot halayla hazeh maror halayla hazeh maror shebechol halelot ein anu matbilin afilu pa'am echat halayla hazeh shetei fe'amim halayla hazeh shetei fe'amim shebechol halelot anu ochlin ben yoshvin uvein misubin halayla hazeh kulanu mesubin halayla hazeh kulanu mesubin. On page 5. Why is this night different from all other nights? In 4 ways do I find this night different. 1. On all other nights, we eat chametz and matzah. We can have leavened bread or unleavened bread. But on this night, only matzah. We only eat unleavened bread on this night and through all of Passover. Number 2, on all other nights, we eat many vegetables. We don't always choose to eat a bitter herb, but on Seder night, we specifically eat a bitter vegetable. Number 3, on all other nights, we don't dip our food. At the time this was written, the traditional understanding was that dipping was not part of a normal meal. But on Seder night, we dip not just once, but twice. We've already done one of those dippings, the parsley into the salt water. We'll be coming up to the second dipping at the end of our telling of the story. Number 4, this one we already talked about. On all other nights, we sit however we wish. Sometimes we're sitting up, sometimes we're reclining, but on Seder night specifically, when we eat and drink, we lean and we recline. This night is different because tonight we celebrate the time over 3,000 years ago when the Jewish people escaped from their bitter slavery in Egypt. We're now on page 6. Number 1. Why do we eat only matzah tonight? When Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, finally agreed to let the Jewish slaves go out of Egypt, they had to flee very quickly and had no time to bake their bread. So they couldn't wait for the yeast to cause the dough to rise. Freedom was so important that they left with haste, so quickly, with such zeal, to become free. They took the dough as it was, and it baked before that rising occurred, and what they were left with was a flat, plain, unleavened bread, matzah. Number 2, why do we eat bitter herbs tonight? Because those ancient Jews, the Israelites, were slaves working under the cruel whips of the Egyptian slave masters, making their lives very bitter. We have our own experiences of bitterness, and when we taste the bitterness from the bitter herb tonight, it makes us more aware of the bitterness in our lives and how that connects us to the bitterness of our ancient Israelite ancestors. Why do we dip the herbs twice tonight? Number 3, we dip the parsley into the salt water because the parsley reminds us of the greenery that comes to life in springtime. The dipping in the salt water, as we discussed, is a connection to the expression of tears that was part of the hardship of Egyptian slavery. The second dipping is going to be when we take the bitter herb, which in some traditions is a bitter leaf of lettuce. In other traditions, it's some horseradish, but they've both been incorporated over time. We take these and we dip them into charoset, apples and nuts and cinnamon and other spices. The appearance of it is to remind us of the mortar that our Israelite ancestors as slaves worked with for the making of bricks to construct the storehouses that were what they were being forced to build. But even though this food is a reminder of the work of hardship and bondage, it's sweet and has a delicious, uplifting taste. Even in the midst of experiencing hardship and bitterness, the hope of freedom adds a sweetness that can get us through the hardest of times, reminding us of the possibility. In the middle of page 6, in number 3, we dip the bitter herbs into the sweet charoses because our ancestors were only able to tolerate the harsh bitterness of slavery because of the sweetness of their hopes for freedom. And finally, number 4, why do we recline at the table? We mentioned this earlier. Reclining was something only free people could do in ancient times. Since the Jews were freed, on this night we celebrated by reclining. We're now going to talk about the 4 children, which are archetypes. The rabbis of long ago came up with an understanding of different modes of learning. People ask different kinds of questions. People have different curiosities. People have different emotions and attitudes that they feel and express in the midst of experiencing something. The idea is at the Seder, we might encounter many of those. What are these different archetypes? I want to suggest that these different types exist in one way or another in most of us, if not all of us, and that we could all probably identify times in our lives and certain situations when we lean in one or more of these directions, of these different types of learners, in terms of the questions we ask and the way we respond. It might depend on our mood. It might depend on our interest in that topic. It might depend on what else is going on in our lives. So as we encounter these four types, let's think about how they live in each of us. The first is the Chacham, the bottom of page 6. The wise child. This individual loves Passover and wants to understand the meaning of everything we do and all of the details. And the Haggadah and the tradition instructs that to this kind of child we should explain all of the laws and customs of Passover. Pretty straightforward. Continuing on to page 7. This is the toughest one. The second child is called the Rasha. Could be translated as the evil one or the rebellious one. The contrarian tends to be somewhat oppositional, or at least expresses things in a way that creates some tension. This child asks, "What is this ceremony of yours?" as though it did not concern that child. They set themselves apart. They act as though this isn't something that concerns them. Maybe that they're above it all. Others suggest maybe they have been made to feel alienated, and that's why they feel apart, and not on the inside of the experience. And maybe then it's incumbent upon those of us who are on the inside to do a better job of helping people feel included and welcome. Sometimes we might do that job, and certain individuals might still set themselves apart. The Haggadah thinks about this child in that sense, and the tradition says, "Tell this child, it's because of what God did for me when I went out of Egypt." The idea here is that it's for me, but not for him or her, the one who speaks this way, and that we're supposed to say, if the Rasha, you who speaks this way as an outsider, if you had been there in Egypt and made yourself an outsider, you would have stayed apart from the people and you wouldn't have been saved with us. One of the lessons could be simply to remember the importance of being open to the possibility of redemption. And when we say, "What is this to you? It doesn't concern me," we close ourselves off. Then we have the Tam, the third child, the simple one, who simply asks, "What is this?" or "What happened?" And the tradition says, "Tell this one, we celebrate Passover because with a strong hand, God brought us forth from Egypt out of the house of slavery." A simple answer to a simple question, keeping it short and sweet. The fourth child is described as the one who does not know how to ask, which some say is because that child doesn't realize that something unusual is going on. Others suggest they might be experiencing internally an awareness that things are different, and they just lack the tools or the skills to come up with a question. Some suggest that their inability to come up with a question is because their minds are racing and they're feeling overstimulated with abundant awareness of how different and exciting everything is, and it's too much for them. They're overloaded and they're not able to come up with a question. And so the tradition says that it's the responsibility of parents and teachers, petachlo, to open up for them, to give them an opening, and even simpler than the one for the simple child that just says, "This is what God did for me when I went forth from Egypt." And the hope is that just that little bit of explanation might trigger a child to engage in some way. Now we get to the story itself, the Magid, middle of page 7. The Bible tells how God commanded Abraham to leave his country and to go to the land of Canaan, present-day Israel, to become the founder of a great nation. Abraham, with his wife Sarah, obeyed God's command, and they were finally given a son, Isaac, when Sarah was 90 years old. Isaac married Rebekah and had a son, Jacob, whose descendants became the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob and Rachel's son, one of the 12, was Joseph. He was sold into slavery in Egypt by his jealous brothers. He became the Pharaoh's prime minister after he foretold a great famine, stored up grain, and saved millions of lives. Then he brought his brothers and his fathers down to Egypt. Egypt had all of this stored up food, and they welcomed those who needed to come and eat. These migrants were at first accepted because they were the siblings and family of Joseph. We're now at the top of page 12. There, in Egypt, the Jews prospered and became so strong and numerous that when a new Pharaoh arose who didn't know, didn't remember, didn't have a connection to the legacy of Joseph and that sense of appreciation for this immigrant population disappeared and was replaced by xenophobia, a fear, a hatred of the foreigner. And the Pharaoh thought that they were a fifth column, that they were not going to be loyal to Egyptian rule and were going to cause trouble. He decreed that every newborn Jewish boy be drowned. This was after enslaving this population of Hebrews as a way to contain them and prevent the trouble that he feared. Oppression, humiliation, more oppression, and then this horrible edict, an attempt at genocide. A woman named Yocheved hid her infant son, whose name became Moses. She hid him in a small boat, set it on the Nile River, and Pharaoh's own daughter found the basket, found this baby, named him Moses. She raised him as her own. When Moses grew to manhood, God called to him from a burning bush to save the Jewish people, his people, even though he had grown up in the royalty of the palace. He knew that he was an Israelite. He saw the oppression of his brethren. And eventually God heard the cry of the suffering Israelites and called to Moses and said, "Go with your brother to Pharaoh and bring about redemption." So they went and they said, "Let my people go." Pharaoh refused, and God then brought 10 terrible plagues down upon the Egyptians. Since we believe that all people are children of God, even our enemies, we cannot be happy when anyone suffers. So, now, as we name each of the 10 plagues, we're going to spill a drop of grape juice from our cups. We'll take our pinky finger and dip it into our cup and then set the drop of wine in a bowl or a plate that we have near us. We'll then have 10 drops that remind us that we've emptied a little bit of the sweetness of this cup, because whenever there's suffering, we feel it. Our happiness diminishes. Even when that suffering was for the purpose of our redemption, others suffered, and we don't celebrate the suffering. We recognize it with empathy and with a diminishing of the sweetness of our own cup. Page 9, I will say each of the plagues. You can repeat each one after me, and as we do that, we take the drop and we set it down in the bowl. Dam, blood. Tzfardeya, frogs. Kinim, lice. Arov, wild beasts. Dever, cattle plague. Shechin, boils. Barad, hail. Arbe, locusts. Choshech, darkness. Makat bechorot, the killing of the firstborn. Here we have the 10 drops in the bowl. we celebrate in our story that God entered into our lives with so many blessings and gifts and protections and victories. Even if we experienced only one of these blessings, one of these signs of love and care from a loving God, that would have been enough. We look back and we see it all as so much more than anyone could have imagined or asked for. The totality of it is awesome, literally awe-inspiring. On page 10, Dayenu, it would have been enough. We'll highlight taking us out of Egypt, giving us the Torah, and giving us Shabbat. Please join with me. Ilu hotzianu mi Mitzrayim dayenu. Dayenu, 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 dayenu. Ilu natan lanu et Torah, natan lanu et Torah, dayenu. Dayenu, 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 dayenu. Ilu natan lanu et Shabbat, natan lanu et Shabbat, dayenu. Dayenu, 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 dayenu. The slavery saga had come to an end. The Exodus was complete, and it was time for rejoicing. And that's what we're doing at the Seder tonight. We move to our second cup of grape juice, signifying the end of this section of the Seder, of the formal telling of the story, and once again expressing our gratitude for God as the creator of the fruit of the vine and as the source of our redemption. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. We now come to Motzi Matzah, and that refers to two different blessings, both related to the matzah. The Motzi is the prayer that we always say when we enjoy bread, be it leavened or unleavened bread. We're also going to say a special blessing that's only for Seder night. We praise God as the one who has sanctified us through commandments, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, and commanded us, v'tzivanu, regarding the eating of matzah, al achilat matzah. So, hamotzi lechem min haaretz, the blessing that praises God for bringing forth bread from the earth, and then al achilat matzah. At that point, what we will do is we will take the middle matzah, remember the one that we broke earlier? Here's the smaller piece. We will have a taste of it in fulfillment of the commandment to eat matzah. If you're in a group with multiple people, let's try to give everybody first to have a taste of the broken middle matzah, and then the additional pieces of matzah could then also be broken up. We don't want to eat all of it right after this blessing. We want to save some for a couple of steps later when we have the Hillel sandwich. We start with the middle one, but we hold them all up together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al achilat matzah. The matzah is very dry. It's not particularly enjoyable. It's not like the breads that we might delight in the rest of the year. It's plain. It's actually the only time the whole year that we eat bread for a ritual purpose without salting it or adding some kind of flavor to it to enhance the enjoyment of it. This is supposed to be the bread of poverty and affliction. And also, because of our rush to leave slavery and make our way into freedom, sometimes the enjoyment of freedom isn't in the immediate sensory experience, in the simple pleasures of life. It reminds us that freedom comes at costs. We now turn to page 13 and we come to the bitter herb, the maror. Now, some of you might have a bit of green lettuce. What's nice about this is it will allow us to take the charoset, if you have this, in a bowl or a cup. I want to get this ready as well. Here, we're able to actually dip it. Now, I also happen to have some horseradish in its raw form, and I could dip this as well. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use these two different symbols of the bitterness of slavery, these two different approaches to maror, the chazeret, the lettuce, and the horseradish, and together I'm going to take them and dip, remember this is the second dipping, into the charoset, and then eat the combination in fulfillment of the commandment to eat maror on Seder night, just as there's the commandment to eat the matzah on Seder night. This reminds us of the bitterness of slavery. Yet again, it's tempered with the sweetness of the charoset. There's hope for a better world, for freedom, for an end to our suffering. So, we dip, and we say the blessing that ends in the words al achilat maror, praising God specifically regarding the eating of the bitter herb. And then we eat it. We don't lean, because this is the eating that connects us most directly to the suffering of slavery in Egypt. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al achilat maror. We now come to korech, which means a folding or a sandwich, and it refers to what we often describe as the Hillel sandwich, because it was an idea innovated by the great sage Hillel during the time of the Second Temple, during the Roman occupation in the first century before the Common Era. Hillel identified the different foods that the Torah commands us to eat on Seder night. The matzah, the maror, and there actually was another food that we don't officially eat, but we still memorialize it on our Seder plate, and that's in the presence of the shank bone, the lamb bone, because Pesach, the Hebrew word for the holiday of Passover, actually refers to the lamb, the sacrificial offering. In Egypt, each household slaughtered a lamb and painted the blood of the lamb on the doorpost as a protection against that 10th plague that killed all of the firstborn Egyptian males. The Torah commands that there will be lambs slaughtered in the temple, and each household will eat that lamb at its Seder table in celebration and memory of the original Pesach, the offering that occurred in the slaves' homes in Egypt when the Second Temple was destroyed by the Romans in the year 70 of the Common Era. There were no offerings to be made, there was no temple in which they could be made, and therefore there was no lamb eaten as a formal part of Seder night. But we do have the charoset as an additional food. Hillel's idea was, let's take some matzah, Here I'm going to take one of the other pieces. And he said, let's put on the lamb and let's put on the bitter herb and eat it all together as one. It's an open-faced sandwich. Now we have the charoset as well. So we take what we still have left of the bitter herb. I'll actually start with the charoset. I'll put that on as the first layer onto the matzah. And then I take what I have left of the bitter herb, and I'll place that onto my sandwich as well. Charoset and bitter herb on top of a piece of matzah. We do this in memory of Hillel and his wisdom as a way to enjoy together all of the symbolic foods of Seder night. In a traditional Seder, this is now the step called Shulchan Orech, the main meal. All other foods to be enjoyed happen at this point in a traditional Seder. Looking back at our Seder plate, the one item we didn't discuss is this hard-boiled egg. Traditionally, it's roasted. That reminds us of the commandment for the lamb to be roasted. So it's another roasted item. And of course, an egg, like the parsley, has an evocation of springtime, of birth, of renewal, of new life, and of possibility. Its round shape also reminds us of the cycle of the seasons and the way that things come back around, and hope and possibility and life and renewal all come back every spring. You would continue to eat. You still might be eating some of your Hillel sandwich at this point. You can certainly pause the recording if you wish to continue to eat before we continue. I'm going to move forward, and that takes us to Tzafun at the top of page 14, the afikomen, that hidden, wrapped up other part of the middle matzah that was broken and then tucked away. And at this point, we will break up these pieces and have the final bite of the Seder meal. We're now going to express thanks through Barech, Birkat Hamazon, give a blessing of gratitude to God for the food that we ate. At this time, we will pour our third cup of grape juice, because right when we finish the blessing over the food that we have eaten, we move into the third cup as sort of a coda, one more enjoyment to bring a close to the meal. So we're now on the middle of page 14. Feel free to join with me at Barech, Birkat Hamazon. Praised are you, Adonai, our God, who rules the universe, graciously sustaining the whole world with kindness and compassion, providing food for every creature, for God's love endures forever. God, abounding in kindness, has never failed us. May our nourishment be assured forever. God sustains all life and is good to all, providing every creature with food and sustenance. We praise you, Adonai, who sustains all life. Now for the third cup. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. And we lean. We now turn to page 15, and we come to honoring Elijah the prophet. I have a separate cup of grape juice that has been sitting here at my table. And this is the cup of Elijah. Someday, the prophet Elijah will return to the earth to lead the way for an age of peace. In the spirit of Passover, as a celebration of freedom, we welcome Elijah into our homes and into our Seder. Enter, Elijah the prophet. May you soon come and bring in the great age of peace. Page 16. We pour a final cup for ourselves in order to bring closure to the Seder. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Nirtzah, the final step of the Seder. Our Seder is now concluded. May God hasten the day when all swords shall at last be broken and wars ended forever. Let us pray that all humans, freed from violence and hatred and united in an eternal covenant of love, will soon celebrate a universal Passover in the name of the one true God. And we say, L'shana haba'ah b'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. Jerusalem could be a lot of different things. Could be the capital of Israel. It could be a state of mind, a state of being, a sense of peace and wholeness within our hearts and in our interactions with others. Whatever kind of Egypt we're in right now, whatever kind of restriction and confinement still exists in our lives, whatever slavery we're still enduring, may it come to its end. May we overcome it. May we continue to move from slavery to redemption, to come more fully into Jerusalem, whether that's in the homes in which we still live or in the land of Israel. Last year was the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we said next year in Jerusalem. And so, as we look with hope to the end of this pandemic, to the end of this very challenging and difficult ordeal, we say once again, next year in Jerusalem. May we have the chance to be in person, interacting more directly with those we love, ideally before we get to next Passover, but certainly by that time. Page 17, a couple of snippets of song that are commonly sung at the end of the Seder. These are fun songs that maybe have a certain story to them or certain repetition, certain use of number. The children love these songs. One of them is Chad Gadya, an only kid. One little baby goat that my father bought for a couple of bucks for 2 zuzim. An only kid. There came the cat that ate the kid, and then the dog that bit the cat, and the stick that bit the dog, and on. All of these events occur, and the final event is the involvement of the Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy Blessed One. We're not going to get to that part in the song. It takes a long while to get there, but as we sing it, we remember that that final message is that God is present in our lives. May God be present in your lives. In the little details, may we always make room for God, for blessing, and for healing in our lives. And let's enjoy the song. Chad Gadya, Dizvana Babitre Zuzeh. An only kid my father bought for 2 zuzim. Chad Gadya. Then came the cat that ate the kid. Ve'ata shunra ve'achal Gadya. My father bought for 2 zuzim. Dizvana babitre zuzeh. An only kid. Chad Gadya. And our final song is Adir Hu. Great is God. And we look ahead to the promise fulfilled at a time of complete redemption that would involve the building of the divine house that is the temple. The theme is of wholeness and repair. May it come to us in our time. Adir Hu, Yivne Veto Bekarov, Bimhera, Biyamenu Bekarov, El B'nei, B'nei Veitcha Bekarov. And that concludes our Seder. Thank you for participating. It's an honor and a pleasure to be welcomed into your spaces to share in the celebration of this beautiful holiday. May we come to know its themes. May they be fully present for us in our lives. Freedom from hardship, healing from illness, recovering from strife, connection with goodness and blessing, connection to God, however we understand God in our lives. being open to receiving all those blessings. May we receive them during this joyous festival. May we receive them in the months ahead. Chag Sameach, happy holiday. Have a joyous and wonderful Pesach. Thank you for participating.